English overseas explorers and traders, 1500, 1600. Sorry, I meant English overseas explorers and traders, 1550, 1600. Now, in the year 1500, English traders and sailors were very parochial, largely hugging the Channel and North Sea coasts, going all the way from London to the Low Countries, really adventurous. By 1600, English sea dogs and explorers were famous. All sorts of romantic legends accrete. The sea dogs of Elizabethan England, Good Queen Bess as their lady patron, the Spanish Main, robbing Spanish galleons, fighting wicked Spanish papists, etc., etc. All this was written up by Victorian historians, this image, in a boy's own adventure way, indeed to inspire boys of Victorian England to do likewise for the enlarging British Empire of the 19th century. The Victorians felt a sort of kinship with the Elizabethan sea dogs, felt they were the pioneers. This romantic picture, of course, we wouldn't quite accept these days. But in fact, you can at least accept that the explorations were adventurous and brave. They were prompted, however, by something much more prosaic. The slow collapse of the Antwerp market for English wool and cloth, 1551, 1581. The English could no longer complacently just sail across to Antwerp and unload their wool and cloth easily as they had been doing up till then. So they had to look further afield. England was overwhelmingly dependent in foreign trade on Antwerp, you see. This was mainly dealt with, in fact, by something not particularly romantic, transferring the European cloth trade to German and later to North Dutch ports, especially to Amsterdam. But here I want to concentrate on the search it also prompted for further flung, far more exotic markets. First of all, the halfway houses. It led to an East Mediterranean trade with the Turkish Empire. Also interesting because it gave a boost to joint stock companies, sort of much more modern form of commercial organization. The Levant Company was founded in 1581. It became very prosperous, importing currants, that's dried grapes, etc., which the English elite really loved. Broadly similar part of the world, the Muslim southwest Mediterranean, Morocco and Algeria. Trade with them revived from 1551. There had been some in the Middle Ages. Sugar was got from North Africa, but it was much smaller than the trade with the Eastern Turkish Empire. The largely ineffective Barbary Company was set up to regulate it. Overall, a small trade. Perhaps more interesting was the search for a northeast passage to China. They didn't realize how far away China actually was. This involved going up the Baltic. And of course, you didn't get to China, but it did lead to trade with Russia. And a Russia company was founded in 1555. We can call this the first adventurous attempt. The first attempt of the English to go where English people just hadn't gone before. They had gone to the Mediterranean before. Willoughby and Chancellor, advised by the ancient Italian Sebastian Cabot in 1553, mounted the first expedition over there. They made their way to Moscow, the Moscow of Ivan the Terrible, and they managed to survive, which was a feat in itself. And eventually the Muscovy Company was formed. This was, in the 1550s, was the first joint stock company, the first of these modern sorts of organization. But its role was still limited and short-term. Trade with Russia was modest and prosaic, but useful. Tallow, wax, cordage, flax and hides were bought from them. Now we come to the transoceanic voyages and explorations. These are impressive and romantic, but also ruthless and bloody. There is a thin record of transatlantic voyages going back to the 1490s. The Cabots in 1497 were commissioned to explore Newfoundland by Henry VII. But essentially, things do not get going until the 1550s. There is some trade with West Africa based on Plymouth by William Hawkins in the 1530s. He buys peppers there and brings them back. Peppers were very important in those days because It was hard to keep meat fresh. And he also went to Portuguese Brazil to buy dyewood. But this was small. The first slave trader, which became a very prosperous English trade, was James Locke in 1555. He brought black slaves back to England. But the real advances were under Elizabeth from the 1560s onwards, if you can call a slave trade an advance. William's sons, the famous Hawkin brothers, established the triangle of trade, or sketched out rather than established is better, breaking into the Spanish monopoly of South America. The English went to West Africa, traded rather more modern goods with the indigenous chiefs, got slaves in return, sold them to the Spanish colonists in the New World, which was against the Spanish monopoly, and brought spices and sugar back. There was also an attempt to find the Northwest Passage to China through the Arctic, which naturally didn't work, but it got people to know North America, got the English to know North America better. This culminates in the most famous of all these attempts, Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the globe in 1577-80. He goes to South America, he goes to the Philippines, and to what's now Indonesia, challenging the Spanish and Portuguese forts and colonies there. He establishes trade with the Sultan of Moluccas in what's now Indonesia, buying peppers and bringing them back, from which he makes a huge profit. He also, on the way, in just as little diversion, goes to what is now California. So, this is the first great challenge to the Portuguese in Asia, and it is also obviously a challenge to the Spanish in South America. In 1600, the East India Company is founded, which has a greater spectacular future for the English. However, we must remember that the English were latecomers. The Arabs, the Portuguese, and the Spanish had all been there in transoceanic exploration before them, and these were pioneering attempts, but they're important and confidence-building. It all overlaps with the sea war piracy against the Spaniards. But Elizabethan exploration itself was more geographical than quantitative. The great commercial exploitations of these English pioneers belong to the 17th century, when they make huge attempts to challenge the Spanish and Portuguese, and also have to deal with a new northern and Protestant contender, the Dutch.